What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another edition of Trust the Podcast. I am your host, Joe Tuman, as always. It's been a couple weeks since I put out a Trust the Podcast episode, but I am back for a very special occasion because the NBA All-Star Game is coming up. The voting for the All-Star Game will be finalized on January 21st, this Saturday. And ahead of that, before they announce the teams officially, I wanted to give my predictions, who I think is most deserving of being named an All-Star in each conference this season. So that's what I'm going to be doing on this episode of the podcast, just giving my All-Star teams for this season. And that starts, we can start in the Eastern Conference. That has to start with the starting lineups for each conference because, you know, even though we have the All-Star draft when it comes to the actual game, they still make you pick the starters based off the positions in each conference. So you have to have 5 guys from the East, 5 guys from the West, even though the All-Star game is no longer played in that format. It's played in the draft format. So starting with the East, who I think should be the starters. Now, when Chris Reynolds came on the podcast a couple episodes back, we were discussing how competitive the East All-Star race is because you can only have 3 of the 4 elite MVP caliber frontcourt guys as starters. Someone has to come off the bench. Now, Kevin Durant is dealing with an injury. He has his MCL sprain. He is out about 2 more weeks, but he should be back in time for the All-Star game. So as long as he wants to play in the All-Star game and doesn't pull out of it due to the injury concern, due to any precautions he might have, he should still be in line to be a starter. So I didn't want to just say Durant is not the starter because he's hurt, because I do think he'll be back in time for that All-Star game. So who are my 3 All-Star starters in the front court? Who am I going to move to the bench? So first things first, Joel Embiid, the process himself, is absolutely an All-Star starter, and I will not have anyone tell me otherwise. Embiid he's putting up a career-high points per game, 33.6. He led the league in points per game a year ago, averaging 30 points. Now he's improved upon that mark by 3 points. And people are acting like he isn't as good as he was last year. They're continuing to not want to put him in the MVP conversation. It's despicable what the national media is willing to do to our guy Joel Embiid, but this is a Sixers podcast first. And you can call me biased, but I also think just watch the Sixers play. The team has its flaws, and yet Embiid drags them through the mud time and time again. We were missing Harden, we were missing Maxey, and yet this team has stayed atop the Eastern Conference standings, very much in line for a potential home court advantage in the playoffs, and that's very much to do with Embiid. He's also putting up 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2.7 stocks, steals plus blocks, and as usual, his free throw attempts are through the roof, 11.8 free throw attempts for him on the season. He's shooting 35% from three-point range, 85% at the line. For a big man to shoot that many free throws and make them at that rate, I know this is well documented, but it's hard to do. Not many bigs who shoot that many free throws have been as effective as Embiid. He's basically a guard at the free throw line. His touch is like very few others, and I think that's really a really important part about how much Embiid gets to the line, because not only does he get to the line at an elite level, but he converts them at an elite level. So Joel Embiid continues to be an MVP caliber player, and I hope this is the year he finally gets his MVP award. But we're not here to talk about the regular season awards today. We're just talking about the All-Stars. So Embiid is one of my starters. Another guy who is a starter is Jason Tatum, the best player on the best team in the league, the Boston Celtics. 33-12 this season. The Celtics have been setting the standard all year in the NBA. The Celtics, Tatum's leading the way, shooting 47% from the field, 35 from 3. He's averaging 8.6 free throw attempts per game. That's a career high. He's averaging 31 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists, an above-average defensive rating, 1.8 steals and blocks. Simple stuff from Tatum, but it's also a career best output from Tatum, because he was already great last year, helped the Celtics make the finals, but statistically he's gone up another level. And rebounding the ball, I'm going to get to this with Jaylen Brown in a sec as well, but just to let you in on that, Jaylen Brown's put up 7 rebounds, Tatum 8. I mean, these guys aren't bigs. These guys aren't playing in the post very often, but the fact that both of those guys show so much effort on the defensive board, so much effort keeping plays alive, etc. And when your 2 best players are setting the culture like that, that's why the Celtics are so good. Obviously, as Sixers fans, we don't want to see Boston, succeed and maybe win a championship, their first championship since 2008. But at the same time, you got to give credit where credit's due, and that team has been awesome all season. Tatum's in the All-Star game, and he's a starter. So the final All-Star starting spot in the front court, it comes down to 2 guys who are top 75 players of all time, Arguably, maybe talent-wise, the two best players in the league, just in general, Kevin Durant and Giannis Antetokounmpo. As I mentioned, Durant's currently out with the injury, but he's played 39 games this year. He hasn't missed too much time. He's actually shooting a career-high percentage from the field, 56%, and he's also the NBA's best free throw shooter at 93%. 30 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 1.5 blocks. He's got an above-average defensive rating, so the advanced stats check out there with the blocks. And, I've heard some people say they think this is the best Kevin Durant's ever been. I think that's hearsay. You look at what he was doing with Golden State, just having so much talent around him. Plus, he was at the peak of his powers before the Achilles tear. Just having that talent around him, plus being where he was in his career, I think that was his peak. That was the peak of him as a two-way player. That's where he won his championships. That's where he looked the most dominant to me. But this version of him, at least offensively, isn't that much far behind. And that's kind of terrifying because I was ready to write the Nets off as contenders. That has to do with my hatred of Ben Simmons, my detesting of Kyrie Irving. I mean, probably my two least favorite players in the NBA play for the Nets. Plus Durant, if any of you listening have listened to this podcast or heard me talk about basketball, I absolutely respect Kevin Durant, but he's not always a guy I want to root for. So I think I even told Chris a month ago that I would make Durant the guy who comes off the bench in this All-Star game and start Giannis, Embiid, and Tatum. I have changed my course on that because I don't know if Giannis is really truly at fault for what's going on with the Bucks right now, but the matter of the fact is Giannis is not having the statistical output he has in years past. All of his stats are down. The Bucks are only 29-16, which is still pretty good. They're absolutely a playoff team, and maybe, just maybe, if Chris Middleton can finally get healthy, if they can get some other guys healthy, get Joe Ingles fully, he already looks great, but just get him fully acclimated, etc. Maybe they can look like finals contenders again. But ever since about a month ago, they've kind of been a 500 team after such a great start to the season. Giannis has played 35 games. He's shooting 52% from the field, 24% from 3, 65% from the free throw line. Without thinking about it, you might say those are normal numbers for Giannis. All of those numbers are down. Just to look at last year, I believe he shot 57% from the field, 29 from 3, and around 72 from the line. He is shooting a career-high 13 free throws attempts, but as I mentioned with Embiid shoots 12 free throws. He makes 85% of them. Giannis shoots 13. He makes 65. So he's barely making more than he misses. And when you're shooting that many, that means people want you at the line. And I love Giannis. I called him the best player in the league a year ago. He's still certainly in that race. By season's end, I might stick to that. But right now, he's definitely not the clear-cut number one anymore just because he has been faltering a little bit here. Now, I don't think that's all his fault. I think with Middleton being out of the lineup, with Jrue Holiday being banged up, Giannis has had to take on maybe a bigger load than ever, and that's caused his percentages to go down. It's caused him to be more tired. I will say he's still an elite defensive player. 107 defensive ratings, well above the league average. The Bucks are the number 3 defensive team in the league. And Giannis is still getting his 31 points per game, but when you're in such a close competition, when Embiid, Durant, and Tatum are playing this well, Giannis being slightly worse than he was before, with those 3 guys being arguably better than they were a year ago, especially in Embiid and Tatum's case, I think Giannis, that makes him the guy. He's the odd man out, and he's the 6th man for the Eastern Conference All-Star team, or at least he's not a starter. Once again, the whole Eastern Conference thing doesn't matter because they're going to draft the players in the All-Star draft. But with that aside, that's my argument from the front court. I think Giannis should come off the bench. And now I have to address the 2 starting guards in the Eastern Conference. One of those players is very obvious to me. That's Donovan Mitchell of the Cleveland Cavaliers. I would say he was part of arguably the biggest trade of the offseason. I don't even think it's that arguable. It's such an impact move for Cleveland to add him to an already really good team. The Cavs are the number 1 defense in opponent points per game allowed. They're the number 2 team in defensive rating as a team. Donovan Mitchell looks rejuvenated as a two-way player. He's already such a great offensive player, although this is probably his best season offensively, and he's also seemed to get those defensive hound instincts back now that he's playing alongside such great defenders like Mobley and Allen and a guy like Garland who brings the best out of everyone around him. So Donovan Mitchell, 28 points a game, 5 assists, 1.4 steals, shooting very efficiently from the field, 48, 39, 87 splits. He could easily get to 50, 40, 90 if he has a really hot month or something coming up. I'm glad to see this from him because he's gone up a level. It might have to do with the teammates around him being better than ever, but it also has to do with him. He bought into the Cleveland system, and he is their best player. And really, offensively, they're going to go as far as he can take them. They lost to the Grizzlies just last night without Mitchell. He was out of that game. They only lost by 1 point. I mean, you figure if he's in that game, they win the game. So that was a game that it was noticeable that he wasn't there, but it also shows a lot about Cleveland that they competed so well even without him. So I don't know. Donovan Mitchell, to me, is a shoo-in for the all-star starting guard spot in the East. Now, looking at the other spot, I was considering both Tyrese Halliburton and Jaylen Brown, but I looked at the Celtics starting lineups, and Derek White usually starts alongside Marcus Smart. So I guess that makes Jaylen Brown a forward this year. Now, once again, positions very odd in the NBA at this point. I mean, to me, it's point guards, centers, and then everybody else is a wing. Jaylen Brown is a wing. It's kind of weird to put a position on Jaylen Brown, but technically speaking, he is a forward. So that means Tyrese pretty much gets the starting guard spot. And I'm thrilled for him because he's been awesome. He's one of my favorite players that isn't on the Sixers. He's only 22 years old, and he's already pretty much the best pure point guard in the NBA now that Chris Paul is kind of dwindled. Tyrese has played 40 games. He is hurt right now, but it's not a long-term injury. He'll be back shortly. He's shooting 48 from the field, 40 from 3, 88% on his free throws. He is 20 points a game and 10 assists. He leads the NBA in assists per game with 10.2. He contributes defensively, 1.8 steals per game. If you go to this site I've been using, Crafted NBA has like every advanced stat you'll ever want to look at. I try not to rely on those, but I was looking at Tyrese. Every advanced passing stat you'll find, he's in at least the 90th percentile, and then he goes up to the 95th and the 100th in some percentiles as well. He's pretty much, pound for pound, the best creator in the NBA this season. Now, James Harden on the Sixers, I know this is a Sixers podcast. I don't want to undermine our guy because if you look at Harden's assists per game, he actually has more than Tyrese, but Tyrese has played like 15 more games than James Harden. So in terms of like the qualifying stats, Tyrese has more total assists, and he also, I guess they're giving it to him for now. Now, maybe if Harden catches up in games played, he'll be able to catch and take that title from Tyrese. But for now, Tyrese is regarded as the best passer in the league. The Pacers are 23-22, which isn't like amazing, or 23-23. They're currently the 9th seed, but that's a lot better than a lot of people thought the Pacers were going to be. At 500 in the Western Conference, they might be the 6th seed right now. I mean, everybody in the West is so jumbled, but the East is so good that the Pacers find themselves currently as a play-in team. But the reason they're that good starts with Tyrese. He makes everyone on this team better. Miles Turner is having the best offensive season of his career. A lot of people were trying to trade him out of Indiana, saying they should trade him to get some younger assets. He's turned in a great performance this season with Tyrese. I mean, rookies like Nembhard and Ben Mathurin are benefiting. Buddy Hield as a catch-and-shoot guy. Tyrese he's elevated the shooters, he's elevated the bigs on the Pacers, and it's made them into a real competitive team. I think he's a starter in the East this year. Then you move on to Jaylen Brown. He's a guy I think is an all-star. He's definitely coming off the bench for me because I don't think he can catch, as I said, all those other forwards in the East, but this is the best season of his career. 27 points per game, 7 rebounds, as I mentioned earlier. He's shooting 59% from two-point range. Now, only 33% from three. His three-point woes from a few seasons ago have returned. But when the Celtics are playing this well, and when he's contributing as highly as he is on both ends, I kind of don't care. He's a prototypical defensive forward in this league. He's the type of player every team wants on their team where he can guard point guards, he can guard fast guys, but he can also be a defensive stopper on the wing. So Jaylen Brown, I think he's pretty much lived up to the potential the Celtics saw in him when they drafted him 3rd overall. A lot of people compared him to Paul George, that type of player. I would say Paul George is a better playmaker. Maybe that's the piece Jaylen Brown hasn't reached. But as a scorer, at this point, I would say Jaylen Brown's there, and he has lived up to that potential. And that's all the credit in the world to him, all the credit in the world to the Celtics. So he's an all-star for me. Another guy I've got, Pascal Siakam of the Toronto Raptors. He's the NBA's minutes per game leader for the 2nd year in a row. Nick Nurse is just running that man into the ground. But when he's playing as well as he is, it's almost justified. Pascal's putting up 25 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.4 steals and blocks combined. He's shooting 47% from the field, only 32% on threes, but I'm not super worried about that because of the way Siakam's evolved as a defender and a passer over the past few years has kind of made up for his lack of outside shooting. His free throw attempts per game, I'm a big free throw attempts per game guy. They've skyrocketed from 5.6 to 8.5 this season. He's shooting 8 free throws a game, getting to the line. It comes down for the Raptors for me that I think people want to look down on their team, and rightfully so, because Siakam plays so many minutes. People are like, well, of course he's getting those stats. But the fact that his creation numbers are as good as they are when the Raptors have almost nobody who can make a shot, their entire bench is basically just a bunch of tall forwards who are shooting under 30% from three. I mean, you look at Boucher, you look at Banton, you look at Juancho, all these guys can't make a shot, and it's very bizarre. And the fact that Siakam is still playing as well as he is on both ends of the court, I think tells a lot about him. And I think the Raptors, they look like they might be rebuilding or at least retooling soon. I wouldn't be trading Siakam. I would keep him. I think he's a real star in this league, and he just needs some better teammates so he can really start to show it. So he's an all-star in my eyes. Another guy I think is an all-star that wasn't hard to put on my team was DeMar DeRozan for the Bulls. He's getting pretty much his standard stats at this point. 26 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting 50% from the field. He shoots 18 shots a game. Only one of them are three-pointers. He is a man out of time, but it doesn't matter. He's carrying on 90s basketball, and he's making it effective. I mean, if DeMar's scoring like this and the Bulls aren't terrible, he has to be an all-star in my opinion. I don't think it's something you can really discuss. So coming down the last few spots here for the Eastern Conference All-Stars, I think Darius Garland has to be an all-star once again this season. I've heard some people say he shouldn't be. He's played 36 games, only missed about 6 contests, and that was with an eye injury. He got poked in the eye early in the season. To me, I think he's he's right there behind Halliburton for just masterful creators for their team. Makes everyone better. I touched on it with Mitchell. He's shooting 45% from the field, 40% from 3. He's a guy who doesn't necessarily have to score, but if he's asked to score, if he's asked to step up, he absolutely can be that guy. 21 points, 8 assists per game, getting his numbers both scoring and passing the ball. Shot quality is an interesting stat I was looking at for him. He's in the 92nd percentile of shot quality, which basically means that he doesn't take dumb shots ever. Like he's very much a masterful point guard where he creates for others, and he's only going to look for himself when he knows he can get a bucket. And Darius Garland is so good that a lot of the times when he knows he's going to get a bucket, he's right. Because when you have Mitchell opposite him, I love that backcourt. I think it's the best backcourt in the league. I don't think that's a discussion. Those two guys complement each other so well. I'm glad to see Cleveland succeeding. I'm really hoping Cleveland doesn't have to play the Sixers in the playoffs, because obviously I'd pull for the Sixers, but I love what Cleveland has been doing this year, so I hope Darius Garland continues to succeed. So for my final 2 spots in the East, this is where it gets interesting. So there's 3 guys I'm really looking at, and that's Jalen Brunson on the New York Knicks, Bam Adebayo for the Heat, and then Kristaps Porzingis on the Wizards. Now, Jimmy Butler is another guy that probably should be considered, but he's only played 31 games. And when you look at all these other guys I've mentioned in the East, they've all played in the high 30s or low 40s in games played. And I think Jimmy Butler, he's kind of gets himself disqualified for playing so many fewer games, almost 10 fewer games than a lot of these guys. Now, his teammate in Bam has had to shoulder a lot of offensive load this year, more than ever. 53% shooting from the field for him, 21 points, 10 rebounds. His playmaking just isn't what it used to be. 3 assists, he's turning the ball over more than he has over the past few seasons. Now, you could argue that's because Jimmy's been out of the lineup. Guys like Kyle Lowry, or even worse, guys like Duncan Robinson and Haywood Highsmith, all these guys that are in their rotation that just can't make shots right now. You could blame it on them and be like, how's Bam supposed to play make when he doesn't have anyone who can shoot the 3? I hear that, but the stats are stats. The Heat are not in the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. They're not the team they've been over the past few years, and Bam isn't the passer he's been over the past few years. And to me, that was a lot of what made him appealing as an offensive player. I understand he's scoring 21 points per game, but I just don't feel like Bam as the number 1 option on your team is healthy. And until Jimmy gets all the way back in, that's not going to be good for the Heat. So he is still a great defender. I mean, he can guard 5 positions. He's maybe even the best defensive big in the league. But ultimately, I'm inclined to give these final two spots to Brunson and Porzingis, and I'll explain why. Brunson, for me, everyone bemoaned the signing, which I really didn't get. I thought Brunson was such a good player last season for the Mavericks, especially in the playoffs. He proved he can be a point guard. He proved he can create for others, but he also proved, similar to Garland, that when the shots are there for him, he's very capable of making them. He is scoring more than I think anyone ever thought he would in the pros. 22 points a game. He's also putting in 6 assists a game. And Brunson's not a defender. I mean, I understand that, but that's not what the Knicks ask of him. They ask him to be the point guard, the quarterback of the offense. And that's a position the Knicks have been looking to fill for over a decade, and he's come in and done it very, very well. He's shooting very efficiently, 47 from the field, 39 from 3. So I think Jalen Brunson's an all-star. The Knicks are going to be a top 6 seed in the East. They have to be recognized some way, and I think Brunson deserves that recognition. He's helped restore Julius Randle back to closer to the player we saw 2 years ago than the player we saw last year, and he's just made a lot of guys better. So I think Jalen Brunson is an all-star. And then I'm going to give Kristaps Porzingis, who has been remarkably healthy for Kristaps Porzingis, 39 games played this season. He is shooting 47% from the field, 81% from the free throw line. Since coming over to the Wizards, his career average of free throws per game in Dallas and New York was only around 4. He's shooting about 7 free throws a game over his season and a half in Washington. That's important stuff because when you're as big as Porzingis, a lot of the time, especially in Dallas, Porzingis would just settle for 3-point shots, and it's not that he's not shooting those anymore, but the fact that he's willing to go to the basket, get contact, he's not scared of, falling over and getting injured. He's willing to go to the line in Washington. Whatever reason, he's comfortable in that system, and it's benefiting him. 22 points a game for him this year, 9 rebounds. His rim deterrence stats are back to what they were in his early days with the Knicks. He's in the upper echelon of protecting the rim in multiple metrics, and including just blocks per game, 1.5. But you can also look at how effective players are at shooting around the rim against him. He makes people worse when they step into the paint. And the Wizards, are they bad? Do people want to say they're not relevant? I guess that's fair, but the Wizards are not a bottom feeder. They're still in the playoff hunt this year. They're still in the play-in mix. They beat the Knicks the other night. I think Kristaps is deserving of this all-star berth. I understand that Bam's probably a better player, but I just don't think with what he's been given, I don't think you can make an argument that he's an all-star this year because it's not his fault. It's a similar argument to what I was saying earlier about Giannis, where is Giannis necessarily not an all-star starter? Could he still be the best player in the league? Yes, but with this, what he's been given in Milwaukee has kind of lowered him down this year where he's not an all-star starter. And it's the same for Bam. Bam's probably an all-star player, but with what he's been working with in Miami, it's kind of limited what he can do, and that might make him not an all-star in a very crowded 12-man. You can only pick 12 guys out of this huge Eastern Conference field. There's so many good players in the East. I mean, Drew Holiday, James Harden. James Harden's dealt with injuries, but guys like that, I don't have on my all-star teams. And with those reasons in mind, that's why I think Porzingis is more deserving of this final 12th all-star spot. So that's my reason for why I have Porzingis in there, and that would conclude my Eastern Conference all-star ballot.